In my freshman year of high school, I joined my school's robotics team. I was the only girl on my sub-team. Not wasting any time, the team lead came to me and told me that I don't need to come to the meetings where the real decisions are being made. I stood up to leave the room, full of shame and low self-esteem. But as I left that room, I had one thought. One day, I'm going to run that meeting. And in all my years, it was that decision that mattered, whether I would let someone else decide my worth or my value. I stood quietly in the corner, handed out screwdrivers, took notes, asked questions. I worked tirelessly. The very people who dismissed me eventually had to rely on me. 3 years later, I led that team. And for the first time in the history of the team, we made it to global finals. We placed top 5 in the world. We built assistive technology to help the visually impaired navigate. And another thing happened. More girls signed up to join the robotics team. And that's when I realized I could manifest a room where I belonged. My job was not to fit in. It was to build a world that fit me. Hi, my name is Priya Abiram. I'm 21 years old, an aerospace engineer, pilot, and one day I hope to go to space. I've worked across a couple space companies, worked at NASA, Boeing, Blue Origin, VAST, designed astronaut life support systems, designed parachute recovery systems, designed components to launch rockets, high-power rocket certified, launched a couple rockets myself. I've had the opportunity to innovate a couple technologies, some of which have won international awards in assistive technology, renewable energy, space for Earth solutions. I've got to train underwater. I trained on top of volcanoes, going into lava flows, barely few other humans have ever been on before. I got the chance to 3D print skin and wear makeup while floating in microgravity. I got my sole pilot license in 16 before I got my driver's license, so I fly better than I drive. And one day, I dream of going to the moon and beyond. And yes, that's a tough goal. Only 800 people ever have been to space. But I know that I can do it. In fact, the first woman just orbited the moon, and the first 4 astronauts on the Artemis 2 mission just landed safely back on Earth yesterday. We grow up believing that opportunity is something that is just out there, waiting for us patiently. And then we grow up to realize that opportunity is something that is zealously guarded by a gauntlet of gatekeepers. We're taught the pipeline: classes, grades, academics, get the first right job, and then the next job, and then we're told to wait patiently if possible. But some of us are asked to wait outside of a door that was never built for us in the first place, as if to say, you don't belong, or you're not enough. And maybe you felt this too. You internalize the doubt, you feel like an imposter. I felt the same. So I decided to stop waiting and start building. I am going to build new space. At 7 years old, I walked into the NASA Public Visitor Center, and I saw these huge machines that seemed to touch the sky. My dad pointed at them and said, "Those are rockets. They're the hardest things humans have ever built, and it is even harder to fly in it." That day sparked an idea that I never lost track of, but that day did not tell me how challenging that path down would be. Fast forward to high school, I had a strong urge to figure out, how am I going to get myself to space? I looked around for opportunities. There were aerospace clubs, but they were just long, boring lectures where half the class fell asleep, no hands-on engagement. There were these crazy internships and industry opportunities with really long eligibility criteria, none of which I met. And so I felt like I was wasting time. I stopped looking around and I decided to start building. I looked at public images of NASA's satellite archives of the Martian terrain. I grabbed 2 friends, and boom, I had my first research team. I emailed every single person that I knew, and after 100 no's, I finally got one professor to reply and say, yes, he will mentor us. What started as a little school project turned into my first research publication about harvesting geothermal energy on Mars for future settlement. What started as a little school project invited me to fly out to Paris to the world's largest aerospace conference, International Astronautical Congress. I'm 5'4", petite by some measures, but nothing has ever made me feel smaller than standing there in this giant room with 9,000 other aerospace delegates. I had a great learning experience at Paris, but of course, each day in Paris is very expensive. So my mom booked my return flight to be a day before the award ceremony because no point in staying for an award ceremony that wasn't going to include me. I got an email a day before my flight saying that I need to stay till the very end. I called my mom and she said, well, I'm not going to rebook an expensive international flight ticket for a participation award. So I had to go back to the conference organizers and ask if I'm getting a participation award. Eventually, I convinced my mom to let me stay. And there I was in my white leather suit, standing next to 10 other male awardees. I had just won a silver medal in the world's largest student research competition for aerospace. And it was there in that moment, standing on stage, looking out at a sea of people, I realized what I was actually building. I realized my purpose. When you build your own door, you don't just walk in, you hold it open for other people to walk in with you. I was not standing there because I had 20 years of experience like everyone else did. I was standing there because I had a different perspective to offer. And that brings me to my first rule of building new space. Build undeniable value and let your merit be your confidence. Around high school, I also joined the Civil Air Patrol, which is the auxiliary of the US Air Force. And over there, I primarily joined for their aerospace education program. I quickly realized that their aerospace education program did not match the ambition of the students sitting in the seats. And so I decided to build my own because I didn't want everyone else to feel stuck like I did. I founded the Smart Aerospace Research Program. We taught 120 students topics in space medicine, model rocketry, programming, robotics, aviation, so much more. It wasn't just boring monthly aerospace lectures. Ran it like a research institution. We didn't just create, we produced. So many students who never even imagined themselves in the STEM world started acting like engineers. And quickly, we realized and decided to scale this to a national program. And as I was scaling it to a national program, I was invited to fly out to Nashville, Tennessee, to the Women in Aviation Conference. There, I met a manager at Boeing. Now, going into this conversation, I knew that Boeing never really hired high school students before to go out and work at their headquarters, but I decided to go up to him and introduce myself anyway. I went up to him and I talked to him about leading technical teams, talked to him about building robots, building rockets. I talked to him about scaling aerospace programs from nothing to winning national awards and grants. And he offered me an interview at the conference. I was nervous, but I walked in and decided that I belonged. I answered all the technical questions, and at the very end, he asked me, so, what year of college are you in? That question. I muttered under my breath, and I was like, I'm a senior in high school. He dropped his pen, looked up at me shocked, and said, I thought you were a master's student. And quickly, he went on about eligibility, liability, paperwork. And suddenly, it wasn't about my technical experience anymore. He said, we've never done this before. So I made being a first-timer my mission. And that brings me to my second rule of building new space. When you're denied access, don't accept it as fate. Redesign the boundary. So I got an internship at Boeing headquarters as an 18-year-old senior in high school. Sometimes, though, in the aerospace world, it's not just about getting your foot in through the door. There's a lot of resistance rooted in the culture once you're in there. 3 years ago, I interned at an aerospace startup. It was about 35 people. I was one of 2 girls. I was responsible for designing a drop test vehicle to test various different configurations of parachutes under various different mass and payload configurations. It was a project of 59 different parts, did not exist when I came in, and I was responsible for building it from start to finish in the 12 weeks that I had. Many times during design reviews, presentations, evaluations, my manager would often tell me that my work needs to meet the efficiency and the effectiveness of the male interns. Many times I would go to work at 9 a.m., stay until 9 p.m., sometimes even 10 p.m., be the last person to walk out of the building many times. I'd lock the door behind me, and at the end of the day, I'd walk out and I'd stand there crying, sobbing for 30 minutes. I'd call my roommate, she'd come pick me up, she'd get me ice cream. And then the next day, I'd go back to work, only to be told that I'm not putting in enough effort, not spending enough time, I don't care about what I'm doing. There were many days where I stood there agonizing in front of my closet, deciding what am I going to wear to work. I could either wear a t-shirt and sweatpants and fit in with all the other engineers and be taken a bit more seriously, or I could dress up a little, feel better about myself, wear a little bit of makeup, but risk being seen as stupid or unserious. I thought the answer was to do more. I thought the answer was to work harder, to prove myself, to build more. But engineering teaches you something important. When you're trying to solve a failing spacecraft system, pushing the button harder and harder is not going to fix it. And so I decided to take a step back and start documenting the system. I started collecting evidence of every single thing that happened in terms of how much work was being assigned, what was given to me, what were my contributions, what was I getting done. I turned what felt like invisible bias into something measurable. At the very end of the internship, I asked for a sit-down meeting with the CEO, not to fix it for myself, not to demand justice, but to prevent recurrence. I walked in with evidence, not with anger or emotions, just like I would fix a failing spacecraft problem. I stated my goal very clearly. I'm not here for you to fix this for me. I'm here because I want to make it impossible for the next girl to walk in through those doors and suffer quietly. And that brings me to my next rule of building new space. In engineering, don't blame the user, fix the interface. But the more time I spent in the space industry, I realized that the problem is not only rooted in the culture, it's also the technical work. A lot of the systems that we build for human spaceflight, from life support research, from medical research, is often built around a default human body. And that default human is not female. Life support engineering is the intimate engineering of turning urine into water, extracting nutrients from feces, turning carbon dioxide into oxygen. Failure in life support isn't a mere inconvenience. Failure is fatal. Last summer, I worked at a private space station company designing astronaut life support systems. An engineer came up to me and told me, very casually, about a side project that she's working on. She said that she was redesigning the funnels that are currently used in the International Space Station for women to be able to urinate a little more comfortably. And then she told me about the enormous list of physiological differences between men and women that are vastly overlooked when designing these space systems. Because of differences in bladder pressure between men and women, and because of differences in the exit velocity of urine between men and women, it's a lot messier, uncomfortable, and harder for female astronauts to be able to urinate in space. And I remember thinking, why is this a side project? Why is something as basic as being able to use the bathroom in space considered an afterthought? If we're having all these ideas of building habitats, colonizing planets, building settlements off our world, how are we going to do it without both genders present safely? In fact, NASA itself mentions in their decadals that the long-term effects of menstruation, the long-term effects of menstrual suppression haven't really been studied quantitatively before. We've launched thousands of rockets. We've sent tens of thousands of satellites to space. We've even built rockets that land themselves. But we still haven't mastered the art of building for every human inside it. The next big bottleneck of the space industry isn't metal, it's biology. As the director of research at Operation Period's Redshift Lab, we are flying research to treat menstruation as engineering, not an inconvenience. We are testing an analog for an upcoming spaceflight mission to generate data so that we can better advance the design of life support systems and push forward menstrual health research for all who menstruate. Space is an extreme environment, and many people think that we are trying to go to space to escape Earth, but in fact, that's very far from the truth. A lot of the problems that we solve for space when we go to space is often air, water, food, shelter, energy systems, transportation systems. A lot of that is the same problems that we face here on Earth. Water management, world hunger, scarcity of food, resource allocation and utilization. Space, however, gives us a unique lens with which to look at those problems and innovate a lot of newer technology that can drive sustainability back here at home. Old space was a story about flags and footprints. New space is a story about permanence. Who one day gets to live in space? Who gets to work in space? What is going to be the first baby born in space be like? New space will determine how future generations survive and thrive. And expecting women to adapt is not a strategy. I don't shrink to fit the system, I redesign the system. I'm pushing forward research and I'm building technology so that the future of human spaceflight is not built on missing data. If you ever felt powerless in a room that was not supposed to include you, don't shrink to fit in. Stop asking yourself, do I belong? Instead, ask yourself, what can I build to make it easier for the next person to walk in? Take up space, build it, and make sure the future has room for everyone. Thank you.